Hi, everyone. This is Jeffery Giesener for the Obligations of Memory podcast from the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group. I'm really blessed to have Rabbi Francis Nataf from Israel coming to us today. And Francis is a Jerusalem-based thinker, writer, and educator. He's the author of several books following the Redeeming Quality of the Torah series. It's called Redeeming Relevance in the Torah series. And one of the articles on the religious thought, political studies, and current events is, and he's an associate editor, for the Jewish Bible Quarterly. So welcome, Francis. Maybe you can do a better job than I did of butchering your title. So go ahead and give us a sense of what it should have been.
No, that's great. I am an author of several volumes in a series called Redeeming Relevance. I slipped also. I do a lot of teaching here in Israel to adults. I was telling my sister-in-law, she's just retiring from being a high school teacher in Los Angeles, and I was saying that, you know, she I don't know how she didn't burn out. I get to teach motivated adults, part-time, and that's really that's been wonderful for me. And as you said, I also am involved in editing work. I'm associate editor of the Jewish Bible Quarterly, and my books and my teaching, a lot of it has to do with Bible. But I have podcasts. I have a number of writing blogs which deal with current events. I'm involved in all sorts of different educational community type activities. And I even, getting back to the Holocaust theme, I even at one point, actually early on in my career, I was teaching Jewish history and actually teaching a course on the Holocaust to high school students.
So this is a great segue. Thanks for that review there. The audience is really focused on the Holocaust and memory, and the obligations of memory really starts with our parents. I know both of your parents were second gen, so perhaps you can take us back to where they were born, what their pre-war experience was, and just a little bit about their camp experience.
Sure. So my parents were born in Tunisia, which before and during and after World War II was a French colony. The North African Holocaust story is somewhat complicated. Not many people know about it, and I'm not gonna, it's at least one episode, if not several episodes, which should be covered at some point. There are people who've studied it, movies about it, but it's really very much off to the side, so most people don't know about it. But just in terms of our own personal experience, so many of the Germans were in Tunisia, like really an occupational force, which is basically didn't happen anywhere else in North Africa, to some extent in Libya, but nowhere else. They didn't set up what they set up in Europe, but they did set up work camps, and most of the able-bodied men were taken there. Some even died there because of the harsh treatment. But the idea was really to work. And it was the Germans in Tunisia wanted free labor. The Jews were chosen as the most obvious candidate for difficult work that no one else would do. And so my father was there. There's some stories over there. My mother's experience was simply as a civilian, a young woman. She was an adolescent at the time. They tell me different stories, but the one, the most difficult experience that she had, as far as what I'm aware of, is that their family was their home. They had a very large, comfortable home there, and the Germans liked it, and so they told them to get out. You have 24 hours, or maybe not even that. I don't know how much time they were told to simply leave their house. Obviously there was a certain amount of trauma. What I never heard from them, but I know from other survivors of the Tunisian experience, I think the biggest concern was, how long and how far is this thing going to go? Having some knowledge of what was going on in Europe, knowing how much worse it was over there, that was the concern. Luckily, it was not, wasn't prolonged, and all these difficult things really came to an end quite quickly. So this is, yeah. So that's basically in a nutshell.
So your father, you mentioned was in a labor camp. How did he got out at liberation, or how did he?
Yeah. So again, it was, we're talking about, I'm not sure how long. It wasn't from the beginning of the occupation. The whole occupation was 6 months.
Can you put some dates around when?
Yeah. This would be, if I'm not mistaken, this is 1942. The Allies are coming from both directions. From Rommel is pushed back in Egypt, and the British and Americans together are fighting from Algeria. They were supposed to come right away, and they got stalled. The Germans stalled them between Algeria and Tunisia. I think it was another, till the Americans and British regrouped. On the Algerian side, it was another 6 months. And in the meantime, the Germans did what they did. But as I said, it was certainly not anything like what people had in most parts of Europe. And as a result, the trauma was less, even though the trauma was there.
He was liberated from the camp.
So I think this, the Germans simply left. It wasn't a question of liberating the camps. The Germans saw that they were losing, and they took boats and they left Tunisia, and everybody walked home. When they did.
And your mom, she was where during that?
She was actually in a town called Sfax, which is a large port town in Tunisia. Okay. And it's interesting. I don't know where they moved to. I mean, I think that at the time she had some married siblings, so it could well be that I assume they went to other family members, that their homes were not confiscated.
From Tunisia, where did they go?
So they were there. They stayed after the war. Again, the situation was good for them before, and they're very comfortable thereafter. They saw no reason to leave until post-war, when the Arabs, the Tunisian Arabs, started agitating towards independence, which was actually fairly late in Tunisia. I don't remember the exact date, either late 50s, early 60s. So that was really the reason that they left. For my father's family, it was an interesting story, actually. My aunt met an American Jewish soldier during the war, and she eventually got married with him, moved back to the United States very soon after the war. And so they also left fairly early, in the early 50s, and they went in that direction. The aunt was living in Los Angeles. That's where they went to. My mother stayed on later.
Did your aunt sponsor them to come?
It could well be. I don't know exactly how it worked. It certainly makes sense, but I don't know. That was something that we found out.
All right. So your parents come to LA, and they're already married, obviously.
They come separately. My father comes with his family, his family consists, besides the aunts already there and married, it consists of his mother and two single siblings, a brother and a sister. That's about 1952. 1958, my father sees that he wants to marry someone more like him, like himself, and so he still has a brother in Tunisia who essentially sets up a shidduch, sets up a match. Maybe not formally, but he's essentially, there was a idea that he would go back there and try to find someone, and his brother, who had not gone with them, was looking out for him, and they found the match. So my father went out there, dated my mother in Tunisia for a couple months, got married there, and brought her back to the United States in 1958, end of 1958. Yeah.
That was when I was born. So that's a nice,
Okay.
that was a nice date.
It's good time.
So, okay, so your parents are now here. So what was their occupation? How did they make their way? When were you born? And I know you have a sibling.
Right. So my father had a difficult time adjusting. He came. The English that he had was very much school English, and he struggled. He didn't have a degree. In Tunisia, he was basically a businessman, and he could do many number of things, and he did a whole, if I understand, quite a few things, and was quite successful, as were most of the Jews living in Tunisia. And they weren't so well prepared for the immigration to the United States. So he struggled at a variety of things, and he ended up together with a single brother opening up a shoe repair store in Hollywood. The one perk of that was that they got to know a lot of film stars, and got their pictures on the walls, and as many of the outlets out there, it wasn't on Hollywood Boulevard, but it was a block away. So that was his story. My mother had more of an education, and she had been a teacher in Tunisia, and that's what she went into in the United States as well. She taught French in 2 or 3 private schools, one of which she stayed I think about 25, maybe 30 years, and she retired from. It was actually a Catholic school, which was an interesting combination. But they treated her very well, and so by and large, it was a good fit.
And when were you born?
So I was born 1960, and my brother was born 3 years later.
Interesting. So you came up in troubled times in the United States. So
yeah,
do you remember anything? Do you remember any of those times since you were such a young child? Is any memory?
Yes, that's interesting. Yes and no. We were warned about the drug culture growing up. Certainly something that was prevalent in our part of the United States on the West Coast. My cousin, who was my father's sister's son, so he grew long hair, and he did the whole radical thing. So that was sort of front and center in terms of what was going on.
Well, 1963, Kennedy was shot, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, that's too early for me to remember. I mean, the one traumatic memory I have, this circles back to where I am now, is being in the synagogue on Yom Kippur in 1973. So that's not American trouble, but I remember the feeling, that we were in the synagogue. At that time, I was attending a Reform synagogue, and news got to people that the Arab armies had invaded Israel, and we were quite scared. The news was very.
It's interesting you bringing that up, because I was in the synagogue in Hebrew school as well, and I remember that same incident. So coming back to your parents, did they suffer any trauma or anything from coming to the United States?
Yes, I think that was difficult for them. They really maintained an immigrant mentality, and in their case, I think for a lot of the Jews from Eastern Europe, there was sort of Landsmannschaft. There was groups of people coming from the same towns or same areas that had things in common. Whereas with my parents, the Tunisian Jews, by and large, went to France and went to Israel. People did not come to the United States, and if they did, they would not come to Los Angeles. I mean, so we were very isolated in that sense.
Now, did I hear that your brother's father came with them to the United States, or did I mishear
my,
that?
My father's mother came, and as
Okay,
well as a brother and a sister.
so you had some relatives
Correct.
that were
Correct, yeah.
at least a grandparent you had, which many Europeans, and including myself, I had no grandparents in the United States. I did have one grandparent in London who escaped from Nazi Berlin, but I lost my paternal and my maternal grandfather to the Nazis murdering. So what was it like for you? And talk about it a little bit. Your brother's 3 years older. Are you close with your brother? Still, is he in Israel, or is he in LA? You know, what's the status between you and your brother?
Right. So we're fairly close. I mean, we're distant in geography. He moved to Colorado, to Denver. And our lifestyles are very different. As I said, I didn't grow up Orthodox. We grew up traditional, going to a Reform synagogue, and at some point I decided that I wanted more than that. Whereas he opted in the other direction, to have less than what we found in our home. So there are a lot of differences, and we live far apart. But we have I would say, a reasonably good, warm relationship
So
together.
I ask everyone this question: growing up in a survivor's home, do you have any stories that you can kind of pull out of your growing up with your parents and knowing that they were involved in some degree to the Holocaust? Maybe not the European degree, but certainly they were displaced.
Yeah, so I mean, I recall certain stories. The one thing that I recall in particular is actually sort of a humorous story that on Purim, so we celebrate the downfall of Haman, and certainly the similarity to Hitler is not was not lost on anybody, but apparently they had a custom there, at least during the war, that they would make paper cutouts of Hitler and throw them in the fire on Purim.
This is in Tunisia.
This is in Tunisia. Yeah, their mini revenge on what was going on.
Yes, so was that a story that your parents told you, or did this?
Yeah, that was my mother.
Did that custom continue in any way while you were a
child? So I don't know. Certainly, we didn't do it. Was it just during the war? Did it continue after? I can't tell you. It'd be interesting to find out. I do belong, actually. It's funny that we had the question about, do I count as a second generation or not? I do belong to a group which is primarily a face group, which is primarily in French, which is called la deuxième génération, second generation, specifically for children of Tunisian Jews. So
how many members are there?
I don't know. It's a few hundred. I can't tell you exactly. It's not been so active recently. Like many of these groups. I mean, your case is an exception where you really started flying, but it picked up for a year or two, and sort of got quiet after that. But it'd be interesting to put this up on the board and see if anybody has a recollection of that custom.
Well, they're certainly going to hear it today from this interview. So let me ask you: you were a good student as you were growing up. When did obviously you're a rabbi, and you spent years and years of study, and you continued to spend time and study. So when did that trigger click that you kind of wanted to pursue an educational service type of career?
Right. So I was a good student. I was naturally interested in knowledge. My mother, being a teacher, certainly was a positive influence in that direction. She's a very cultured woman, and so that was pushed, and I certainly absorbed that. As far as rabbinic, so it's interesting that in spite of education being pushed, I felt that my Jewish education was lacking. I went to what's called Sunday school and Hebrew school till age 13, something like that. I don't remember exactly, maybe even earlier. And even, it was not, as is often unfortunately the case, it was not very intense. It was there were few interesting courses and teachers, but by and large, it was not very impressive. And by the time I got to university, I was, very proud Jewishly. Even my freshman year, I think I became the president of the Jewish Union, which was pretty bizarre. It was a small college, and
What
there
year?
hadn't been.
What year are you now? What year are you?
So this was 1977. That's my freshman year of college. I get to Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, which at the time did not yet have any Jewish student union. And so a bunch of us, and not just freshmen, a bunch of us organized together. And I wasn't the first president, but by the end of the year, I think that the president was a senior and was leaving. And so he pushed me into the role so that I would take that on early.
Did you experience any anti-Semitism with you starting a Jewish organization?
No. I mean, I don't know what Oregon is like now. It's hard to know with all, everything that's going on up there. But, it was very liberal, live and let live type place. On the contrary, I found a lot of non-Jews that were very interested and very appreciative of my Jewish heritage.
So you went
there was
you went to school with how many Jews in Lewis and Clark?
So there were this is a school of about 2,000 students, and I would say there are probably about 300 Jewish students at the time, maybe half of which identified as Jews and the other half not. Yeah.
All right, so we're now going to touch upon, because we're getting close to the end of our first episode. My question is, what triggers you to go into the rabbinate? And it's probably not a 5-minute answer, but we have 5 minutes left before we exit this one, and we'll pick up on the other side.
Right. So as I said, the interest wasn't in rabbinics per se or being a rabbi. The interest was in completing my education. So come junior year, I'm actually studying in Munich, which has a branch of Lewis and Clark College, has a branch operation in Munich, West Germany, and there I am, close to Israel, and having a sense that I had never been to Israel. I want to go there. So there's a semester break, and I do just that, and find opportunities to dig in more deeply into the Jewish heritage and go to some very serious classes, which I do. And I do so for about a month, go back to Germany, but during that month or towards the end of it, decide that I want to pursue Jewish studies in greater depth, deciding that I would do so after I finish and get my bachelor's degree. I do so, and in 1982, taking a few months off between college and yeshiva, I go back to Jerusalem and spend the next year and a half in Jerusalem, and then go back to Yeshiva University from there to pursue a rabbinic ordination, as well as an advanced degree in Jewish history.
So your yeshiva was in the United States?
Well, both, but the where I got my ordination, was in New York.
Okay. So I have to ask you, and we'll wrap it up because I'm going to kind of tie back into the Holocaust here. I visited in 1980 Germany, and I went to Munich as well. And I couldn't stay in Munich. It was really, really difficult because most of the old people were hanging around on benches, talking, and I just were shaken from that experience. I'm wondering if when you went to school in Munich, what you were thinking. Now you didn't have the same upbringing as I did because my mother was in Auschwitz, but so we're different in that respect. But I was wondering what you thought about.
Right, so I have a great story. The bottom line answer to your question is I didn't feel that. I connected much more to young people, both young Jews and young non-Jews. But there's a great story that there's a place in Munich called Odeonsplatz, which is a very large square with this arch. And having spent time there in Germany, having gone to different museums that have footage of what the Nazi period was like, so there are pictures of Hitler having these immense rallies at this place in Munich, where I would cross by every day. So that there was this tremendous feeling that I got at the end of my year over there, the holiday of Shavuot. Holiday of Shavuot is a custom for many Jews to stay up and study Torah all night. So there was in fact such a practice. It was Bnei Akiva, young Jews, who organized this, and I participated, and we studied. It was probably 15, 20 young men and women with a rabbi from Israel, and that's what we did. And then on the next morning, I was Orthodox. I wasn't going to drive back from the synagogue. I walked back from the synagogue to the student housing by way of this place, of this Odeonsplatz. And my sense was that the Jews have been victorious. Hitler's gone, his hordes are gone. Odeonsplatz is where Jews come back from learning all night, which was for me like a tremendous sense of, Am Yisrael Chai, we're victorious. And it was very impactful for me in terms of putting some sort of closure and making some sort of sense of what the experience meant to me as a Jew.
Well, that's a beautiful story, and it's a great story to end. So I want to thank Rabbi Nataf for a really interesting 30 minutes. We're going to pick up our interview, our second interview, shortly. So come back. You're listening to the Obligations of Memory podcast for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks so much. I'm Jeffery Giesener. Take care. Thanks, Rabbi.
Pleasure.